this in particular was one of our lowest budgeted stunts or activations. And I think it probably had the highest impact from an ROI perspective because it was so easy to pop. It was paired with a really strong and compelling announcement.
You're listening to the Hello DTC show presented by Beaconstac, a show where champions from consumer brands reveal their secret sauce for growth. This is where the best DTC stories are narrated, from one successful brand to another.
Hello everyone, and thanks for listening to Hello DTC presented by Beaconstac. I'm Monica, Marketing Manager at Beaconstac, a solution that helps any CPG business activate a DTC channel for their business. All our podcast episodes till now have been about DTC brands and their winning strategies. But trust me, this is very different. This episode is about a DTD brand, direct to dogs. I was in awe when I first read about the brand and its clever direct to dog campaigns. I'm talking about Jinx, a wellness and nutrition brand for dogs. This is a brand that started in the beginning of 2020 and has rapidly been growing at a rate of 40% month on month. Among all the other brilliant campaigns that they've been running, the one that took the internet by storm was the scented mini-billboard campaigns. We'll get to that in a bit, but before that, I'd like to introduce you to our guest. On today's podcast, we have Terri, co-founder and CEO of Jinx. She has over 12 years of experience in building digital first brands, from Mothcloth to Casper to Outdoor Voices, and now starting her own venture, Jinx. Her journey has been nothing short of mind boggling. Welcome to the podcast, Terri.
Thank you so much for having me.
How have you been? How are things in your world right now?
Everything's good. We're busy. As you can imagine, coming out of the summer months and entering fall and ultimately preparing for Q4 and a couple of major launches as it relates to product expansion and retail partnerships, we are just hustling with a very small team to get it all done.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And how are things at this point, because we are still fighting a new variant of COVID and things are just reopening. So, is everything back to normal? Did the strategies change as a result of that?
What is normal is the question. Unfortunately, the numbers and the cases continue to fluctuate. And so I would say that volatility certainly drives a lot of volatility in terms of business consistency and overall behavior. But we are just pushing through. We've certainly got a lot of tailwinds, being that there's a lot of new dog parents in the world or families that are opening their homes to multiple dog households. And so we are just trying to serve as many dogs as we can with premium nutrition and really leaning into some of these positive trends that we see within the dog food category specifically.
Right, right. And you're building a really fantastic brand. I'm in love with what you guys are doing. Can you tell us a little more about the brand itself?
Thank you. Yeah, I can definitely tell you about the brand, and I'll try not to gush because it's a real passion project for myself and my co founders. But effectively, we were all really passionate dog parents, treating our dogs like children because we don't have real children or human children just yet. And we were ultimately really curious and confused as to why we couldn't find brands that our dogs liked that were shelf stable in nature, completely affordable, but then also just generally relatable to the millennial dog parent. And so as we started to conduct our research and realized from a formulation perspective that most premium diets are formulated for highly active animals, we ultimately figured out that those were not the animals that we actually had. And so we set off to carve out some white space in a very congested category by designing a diet that is really architected to support the modern dog's lifestyle and delivers balanced nutrition in every bite. And that's done through just more appropriate proportions for a moderately active animal.
That's really adorable. I mean, the brand itself is so adorable and so thoughtful. But also with respect to the campaign particularly that we are talking about, honestly, the first time I came across the billboard, the mini billboard story on Adway, which was a couple of months back, I was amazed. I have never seen such tiny billboards before. Can you tell us more about the campaign and where this idea really originated from?
Yes, absolutely. So, as you can imagine, we spent almost the entirety of 2019 really kind of building out what I called like a go to market strategy or a marketing playbook. And as we really marched up toward our launch in 2020, we could have never expected to really enter a climate that was so scary. And what I mean by that is we soft launched the brand in January and we were just making sure the website or the digital storefront was working properly. It was connected to the back end and packages were getting to where they were supposed to be. And there was generally some really good product reception. When we were finally ready to step on a bigger stage and announce, COVID was really reaching its peak. Stay-at-home orders were in place, and people were absolutely terrified to leave the comfort and safety of their own homes. And so we had assembled this really amazing playbook of all of these marketing tactics that we were ready to execute with really cool and fun campaign wrappers. And we really had to ice it all. We put it on the back burner. We activated almost exclusively through digital. So buying digital media across the marketing funnel, but then also activating partnerships really creatively with brands where we had a lot of similar synergies, and really use 2020 to experiment, but do so in a digital only environment. So as the world started to normalize and really open back up, we were approaching a series of new product launches and our first in-store retail partnership. And so when we were thinking about what to pull from that marketing playbook that we assembled in 2019, we loved the idea of these mini scented billboards that we could post at really popular and dog friendly spots around the super cities where we tend to index most favorably with our customer base. And so what we did was we worked with our favorite out-of-home vendor that is responsible for a lot of creative campaigns for direct-to-consumer brands. And we produced these little mini billboards and we posted them in really popular hiking spots or dog parks, or areas where the dog population is just generally really dense. We sprayed them with a really attractive dog-friendly scent. So dogs would be really interested in them. And we went and hung out and kind of took pictures of the dogs interacting with the billboards. And the messaging strategy was really designed around some of the product differentiation value propositions for the new products we were launching, and also in celebration of our first in-store retail partner, which was Target.
That's amazing. So you've also worked with Casper, and Casper is very unlike a lot of the other DTC brands. It spends a lot on the out of home advertisements. So I'm sure you have in the past worked on the billboard campaigns, the general ones. So what is it with the billboard campaigns that you've run in the past that you think um, don't get the kind of success or don't get the kind of eyeballs that something like a mini billboard campaign, for instance, did for the brand Jinx?
Yeah, well, listen, we had much bigger marketing budgets, so we could do much more high impact, sexy, splashy stuff at Casper. But I think the reality is dogs are a lot more fun to market than mattresses. And I say that with all due respect because the Casper experience was a complete, unique rocket ship experience for myself and my co founders. But when you think about the creative runway that you have to really build campaigns around dogs or the bond between humans and their dogs, I think it's just generally so much more compelling to people. Even people who might not have a dog as a pet, I think get some type of joy from seeing this kind of clever activation, as opposed to, another mattress ad or another drink ad or another like trending kind of D2C kind of component. So we were really happy with the reception. I think that like we had so much joy that was just sparked by seeing the dogs interact with the billboards and be so curious about the billboards. And then of course we had boots on ground there with bags of treats that we rewarded the dogs with as they interacted with the actual physical structure.
That's very sweet. So I'm just trying to understand this because there are fewer people on the road right now. And if you talk about the billboard spendings, obviously it's better than the previous year, but it's still not as high as the pre-pandemic numbers, right? So were there apprehensions with respect to just going out of home and doing billboard campaigns when you first discussed this with the team?
You know what? There weren't. And I think it's because now is a really great time for brands with smaller budgets to use this as an opportunity to test more traditional media. In this really specific case, the billboards were so small. So when you think about production costs and media costs, it's really a fraction of what it costs to post on, one of the big high marquee placements on Sunset Boulevard, right? So the cost for us was actually quite low. And I think the creativity of the activation was what really garnered a lot of attention in terms of press coverage and overall consumer reception and favorability. So this in particular was one of our lowest budgeted stunts or activations. And I think it probably had the highest impact from an ROI perspective because it was so easy to pop. It was paired with a really strong and compelling announcement. And then it was just different from, the traditional billboards you're used to seeing.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mention ROI and you talk about the press coverage but part of it because with billboard campaigns now the goals and what people start with and what they have in mind is very different from what we were seeing 10 years back. So I'm curious to understand what were the goals when you just started with a project? What did you want to achieve by the end of it?
Absolutely. So, as you alluded to, I was buying a lot of traditional media during my time at Casper. I would say, we had almost $7 million monthly budgets, and about half of that was spent on traditional advertising and half was spent on digital advertising. And so we had gotten really sophisticated about traditional advertising measurement and attribution. Generally speaking, it's really challenging because you're trying to quantify something that's not necessarily trackable in a really clean sense. And so where we arrived at was really measuring success based on softer metrics like awareness and brand recall and overall favorability. And then, of course, site traffic and sales. But you really do have more of a sense of impressions and reach to tie back to an awareness KPI. You can do surveying, or you can measure direct organic and paid search traffic, or you can track traffic through a vanity URL to understand recall of said campaign. And then favorability is typically measured through some type of brand reception. So press coverage, social media following, and people just generally chatting about the coverage and the campaign type. And then sales are a little bit cleaner, right? Like if you've got a promo code or an offer redemption or some type of post-purchase survey, you can tie that back to sales in some regard. So I think that there's a couple of ways to slice it as it relates to figuring out the potential impact of an out-of-home campaign, specifically a billboard campaign. But for us, this was more of like a playful, fun activation that we paired with an announcement that would have typically gone out through a pretty standard digital press release.
True, yeah. In general, I think we've been seeing some of these technologies, interactive technologies like QR codes that go on billboards and sort of tie back to the entire performance-driven billboard campaign sort of a thing. And it basically tells you how many people are scanning and how many people are actually for this campaign, for instance, how many people are navigating to Target to make a purchase or how many people are buying online, etc. So what do you think of technologies like this and what space does it have for the future of billboard campaigns?
So I'm totally obsessed with it. While we haven't experimented with QR codes at Jinx, I've definitely seen them and I've seen some really great examples of them. We're exploring a QR code implementation on packaging because we're about to launch through a major retailer. And in an effort to do some demand generation and lead generation, we really want to be able to really easily get the customer who's picking up that bag and potentially buying that bag to our website to really engage in the subscription commerce experience. And so we're thinking through it from that perspective, but where I've seen QR codes just enable better one-on-one interactions are through two brands. So one is called Goody, it's a gifting app, and they did a really cool Valentine's Day campaign. I saw the campaign in New York City when I was there to promote the launch of Jinx. But really it was intended to, scan the code and very easily gift something to your Valentine in a super seamless way, like as you were waiting for your train, right? And so I thought that was brilliant. And I thought it was, tied to a culturally relevant moment, which probably resulted in just a lot of success given the timing and the flight of that campaign. And then the more recent one I saw was for JLo Beauty. So Jennifer Lopez's skincare line, and she had these big QR codes posted on subway trains where you could kind of scan to shop. And everyone knows, like, you're just trying to kill time when you're on your commute to work. And so I think in the sense that you're not driving and you can very responsibly be on your phone, you can use that opportunity to really immerse yourself in a shopping experience. In this case, I've also seen QR codes used to drop customers or potential customers in editorial experiences. So I've seen them used on a spectrum from really transactional to really engagement focused. But I think generally speaking, it's a really great way to get someone with their phone to pursue that brand interaction and have more of a one-on-one conversation, which I think anytime you have an opportunity to host something that generally feels more intimate and you get someone to take that action, you're really driving this memorable moment, which hopefully becomes sticky and really assists with driving some of that brand recall that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, those are all very interesting use cases. Recently, I've also read about one of these campaigns that Tesco was running very similar. They had these virtual shelves in subway billboards, and every item had a QR code next to it. So, which means when you're waiting or when you're walking past it, you could just scan the QR code for any item that you want to purchase, and it's more of a transactional use case. But that campaign really drove 90,000 app downloads, just that very campaign. So I thought, yeah, it was very powerful and a very performance driven way of running out of home campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely.
So getting back to the Jinx mini billboard campaign, you spoke about how you dotted the city with these mini billboard campaigns at dog parks and places where you see more dog parents. So are there more tangent tangential parameters or things that DTC brands could who are first time getting into out of home advertisement they could look at to finalize the locations or select the locations that would best serve their billboards?
Definitely. So I would say we have a really strong sense of where we over-index from a customer perspective. And that just happens to be with the population that we call millennial dog parents, and they happen to live in super cities. And so for us, it was really easy. We've all lived or spent a lot of time in the three major super cities, New York City, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And we've all had animals that we've been able to take to dog parks or canyons to hike, or even just dog friendly restaurants or neighborhoods or shopping facilities. And so we knew exactly where we wanted to post, but we also worked with a really good vendor who understood kind of the ideals of the campaign and the campaign objectives. And this is a guy that I've been working with for almost 7 years, and I was pushing a lot more campaign dollars through him for Casper than I am for Jinx. But he was so excited to work for us because he was like, I've never done anything like this. And he's worked with brands of all sizes. But he's never really produced anything or bought and secured and posted media for something that was kind of this unique and this clever. And so his name's Brian Rappaport, but he was really kind of supportive in helping us identify the really specific locations and and really, had a field team that was able to go and activate in the cities that we weren't physically located at, which included San Francisco and New York City.
Right, right. Makes sense. And I think location really is very important when it comes to the overall positioning and messaging. It has a big impact. I know the last time we spoke, we were talking about Judy's campaign, and I looked it up. It was basically in the middle of the sea. It was a ship with messaging that read, "This is a hurricane. Are you prepared for it?" And I thought it was so clever and witty of a emergency kit DTC brand to be putting out a messaging and location at a location like that. What particularly impressed you about this specific campaign, about Judy's billboard campaign?
Well, listen, I think that the world is full of serendipity and just good timing if you're thoughtful about leaning into culturally relevant moments. And I think right now there are just some really sticky trends that consumers are really adopting. Judy is, this kind of really cool D2C emergency essentials brand. But not only are their marketing campaigns and messaging strategies really effective, but right now the world is in such a state of flux that you really want to best prepare yourself for anything that could happen. And so, what better brand to be than a brand that can really service that and give you some reassurance and confidence that you've got the essentials needed in case an emergency happens. And so I think it's kind of like taking some of these well-timed moments and then having a brand with a product proposition that is so relevant to what's going on in the world, and kind of fusing that in a really kind of non-threatening way, but just drives a lot of relevancy in terms of like all of the ads that we see and we're exposed to. So in addition to really thoughtful and successful execution, I think it's just generally well timed. And I think there's a couple of other direct to consumer brands that fall in that bucket too. Figs is this fashion forward hospital scrubs brand. And right now, our healthcare workers are working more than ever. And so, if you can show up in something that you feel good about and safe in, this is a brand that recently IPO'd, but much to the success of leaning into these moments where they're just highly relevant as a product and a differentiated product in a really crowded space. I think that there's so many brands. Our Place is another one, a cookware brand, where if there's a moment to buy more food at the grocery store and cook at home because your favorite restaurants might be closed, or frankly you just don't feel safe enough to go out and socialize and be in the company of a bunch of strangers, I think we're all cooking at home a little bit more. So they've done a lot of really great marketing, and I can tell because they're LA based, just by the impressions that I see, that they're really capitalizing on this moment.
So you were talking about the customer adoption, and that's something that a lot of the other speakers on the show have also hinted upon. One of the things that we are planning to do right now is just take these common insights that we come across all the speakers and just put them in a newsletter and send it out to people. So I think insights like these are really going to be helpful in understanding what the trends are and what's the direction the DTC brand should kind of focus on. For the listeners who want to get this newsletter, you can head to beaconstac.com/podcast. That's where you can sign up for the newsletter and get these amazing insights that the speakers have. But getting back to just the outer form advertising, we know that right now there is a overwhelmingly major saturation that's really happening in the digital space and the social media advertising space, etc. And of course, we are seeing brands like Judy and Roe and Casper and all of them get back to out of home advertising. Maybe not, because the social platform is so saturated right now. But what do you think should be the division or the budget splitting between digital and traditional right now? Because that really seems to be something that a lot of DTC brands are struggling to figure out at this moment as to what the divide should be.
So I think it totally depends on the brand life stage and then also just your business objectives. I would say for earlier stage brands, you have to do a little bit more investment to support awareness vehicles, and a lot of times more traditional advertising media really services an awareness objective. But I would say right now we're about a year and a half launched, totally focusing on all formats of media, so digital and traditional across the marketing funnel. So bottom, middle, top. And I would say our split right now is about 70-30, and it will continue to index toward digital, but really even out, especially as we show up in more environments that are not our own. And what I mean by that is essentially retail partnerships. So I think again, like it can vary, and budget allocation can look very different quarter to quarter, depending on if you're launching new products or announcing new partnerships. Or frankly, just, having some type of really exciting merger. So I think that, brands probably look at diversification of media as a really great way to avoid some of the saturation I think that we're all feeling in Facebook Marketplace or within Google AdWords, because the reality is, whether you are competing with someone who has very similar products or is non-competitive at all, we're all playing in the same auction. We're all driving up media costs and prices. And so it really becomes this situation where we hit a diminishing point of returns, and you have to have some type of tolerance for your customer acquisition costs to really understand what's most beneficial for your business and most sustainable for your business in the long term.
Is there a way, or are there matrices to understand what ROI you're getting from social versus out of home advertising? Have a comparison and decide on the basis of that where you prioritize your spendings?
Absolutely. So I've seen it done a couple of ways, but I think the best way to quantify something that's less trackable or is not considered digital media is really through some type of vanity URL. You can do a post survey checkout, like a how did you hear about us, and give the customer a couple of options. You can do a promotion that's really specific to that media campaign, redeemed through a promo code that's really trackable through your e-commerce platform. Or you can do some type of regression analysis, which basically measures the pre-traffic state, the during traffic state, which is just when you're in flight for that more traditional media campaign, and then the post-traffic state to measure traffic, conversion activity, transactions, and revenue. And all of that can be used to really quantify an outcome, and ultimately the success of a traditional campaign.
Right. So just talking about benchmarks, so when you do these post-campaign surveys, what typically is a good number um, in order to, benchmark yourselves against the industry, saying that, okay, if this is the percentage of people who heard of the brand from this certain campaign, then the campaign was successful. Do you have a playbook? Do you have benchmarks that you follow?
Yeah, absolutely. So for our brand at this stage, when our budgets are smaller and definitely more precious, I would say if we're able to break even, so just kind of arrive at some type of one-to-one investment versus return equation, we feel really good about that media spend because it was truly intended to drive awareness and brand recall and favorability. And so in that sense, if you can almost pay yourself back either by way of a cost per lead or a cost per transaction metric, make up that money or that investment that you spent on the actual media and production costs. That to me is a win for a brand at this stage.
Understood. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, just wrapping up everything, are there some specific billboard campaigns or out of home campaigns that you really enjoy seeing, things that inspire you? Are there some parting thoughts that you have for the listeners?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a long list, but I think in terms of the stuff that I've seen recently that has been particularly memorable and has really kind of engaged me in a way that is atypical given kind of like the overstimulation that we all have from our phones and from digital ads and from traditional media placements. I saw some great ads with some really compelling and messaging that made me almost smirk, and want to try something that's not a typical food that I buy when I'm going grocery shopping one time a week. But they're for a brand called Halo Top, which is basically a healthy alternative to ice cream. And I'm a cupcake girl and I'm a cookie girl, but I'm not necessarily an ice cream girl. But I was like, you know what? I'll try it because I'm sitting here trying to build a healthy alternative to kibble. And so with that clean label and with something that you ultimately want to be functional food, I'm really open to trying new stuff. So Halo Top does a really fantastic job of kind of drawing these parallels, and having messaging that just makes you smile and I think just makes you curious. And then I would say Daily Harvest is another brand where they have a food that is almost this like ready to blend healthy alternative, to what you would typically be eating if you were looking for something really convenient. And again, not necessarily up my alley and built to customize or maybe accommodate my lifestyle, but I think they just do a really great job of posting things, while you're stopped at a traffic light and you've got some dwell time and you look up and you see something and it's really relatable and it looks really delicious. And I know, it was a brand that was on my radar when I was living in New York City, but I never tried it. And then once I saw all of these billboards on Hollywood Boulevard, I was like, let's give it a shot. And so I think those two have been particularly compelling to me most recently. But I think that there's a laundry list of really cool direct to consumer brands that are doing really creative campaigns through traditional media.
That's amazing. So the takeaway really is if you do this right, then billboards do have a major part to play in customer acquisition also.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry. This was really insightful. The campaign that you've run was fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you.